Top 10 fascinating cases of life imitating art. Number 10. Ankle bracelets were invented in a Spider-Man comic. Electronic ankle bracelets have been used by law enforcement for a few decades now, helping the authorities keep track of parolees and limiting them to certain areas to try to keep them in check. These bracelets were first used in 1983 when a judge in New Mexico, who apparently spent his time between sentencing criminals to hard time reading comic books, he was flipping through an issue of Spidey and saw a plot involving a criminal avoiding jail by agreeing to wear electronic monitoring. Of course, this whole thing just makes us upset that of all the cool technology in comic books, that's the one they actually make a reality. Number 9. Zager and Evans sang about test tube babies before they existed. Chances are you've heard of the famous song in the year 2025 by the musical duo Zager and Evans, even if you have never heard their actual names. The rockers from Nebraska penned this fable to warn us all how over-reliance on technology would lead to the destruction of man, and references the creation of life in devices like test tubes. This song was written in 1964 and released in 1968. What's so special about that, you ask? Well, how about the fact that the world's first test tube baby was not born until 1978? Number 8. A Chinese man imitated a Johnny Cash song. There's a Johnny Cash song called One Piece at a Time that tells the story of a man who worked in a car factory, laboring day after day to produce cars he could never actually afford himself. So he concocts a plan to sneak his own car out of the factory, one piece at a time, and construct it on his own at home. In 2003, something almost identical happened in China. That's when a man named Zhang, who worked on a motorcycle assembly line, spent 5 years doing exactly what the hero of Cash's song attempted. He actually might have gotten away with it, except for the fact that he was pulled over by the police shortly after finishing the bike and was cited for not having a license. Number 7. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle became Sherlock Holmes. Holmes, of course, was created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and has endured over the centuries thanks to some unique traits and quirks. There's simply never been anyone better than Sherlock Holmes. Well, except for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself. You see, after creating Holmes, the author actually played a pivotal role in proving the innocence of two men. Number 6. The movie Be Cool was a bad sequel about a bad sequel. The movie Get Shorty was the story of a loan shark named Chili Palmer who goes to Hollywood to collect a vig from Gene Hackman's movie producer character. Along the way, he somehow manages to sell his own story as a movie and becomes a producer himself. The movie was popular enough to generate a sequel which was called Be Cool and centered on Palmer, now a Hollywood bigshot, watching as a sequel was made to his own film. The film within the film in Be Cool was a crappy cash grab that tried to capitalize on the success of the first, which should sound familiar since that's exactly what Be Cool ended up being. Number 5. The British show House of Cards predicted the fall of Margaret Thatcher. You've probably heard of the show, House of Cards, a Netflix exclusive starring Kevin Spacey set in the world of American politics. It's based on a British show of the same name, which was based on a novel that was released in 1989. The original show and novel follow politics in England after the fall from power of Margaret Thatcher. And yes, Margaret Thatcher really did resign from office in real life. However, that was not until a year after the novel was released, and shortly after the BBC miniseries was first broadcast. Number 4. The ending to the movie K9 happened 2 years later. 1989 was apparently the year when Hollywood decided that the buddy cop movie needed to be reinvented, and one of the buddies had to be a dog. That's the year both Turner and Hooch and K9 hit theaters. At the end of the film, the dog is shot and killed during the course of the investigation. Somehow, this downer of an ending actually spawned 2 sequels. Much more tragic than those sequels existing was the fate of K9's inspiration, a real-life Kansas City police dog named Conan. 2 years after the film debuted, Conan met his end in the exact same manner as his on-screen alter ego, being shot and killed during the investigation of an attempted murder. Number 3. Russell Crowe was targeted for kidnapping while promoting Proof of Life. In the year 2000, Russell Crowe starred in the film Proof of Life about a high-profile kidnapping case, with Crowe at the center of it all. Of course, Crowe is more of an expert in kidnapping than he'd probably like to be in real life too. That's because, at the same time as he was promoting Proof of Life, it was revealed that Crowe himself was the target of a kidnapping plot. Number 2. RoboCop 2 predicted the bankruptcy of Detroit. The plot involves a not-so-distant future version of Detroit, in which the city declares bankruptcy and has contracted out many of the city's services to private firms. Skip ahead in time and the movie suddenly looks a lot more prescient. After falling billions of dollars into debt, the city of Detroit was actually forced to declare bankruptcy, mirroring the events of the film. And, like in the film, some of the city services have in fact been contracted out to private businesses. Number 1. There's really a meth kingpin named Walter White. In case you've been living under a rock since 2008, the television show Breaking Bad is about a mild-mannered man named Walter White who becomes a meth cook and ultimately drug kingpin after being diagnosed with cancer. In 2008, right around the same time Breaking Bad premiered, a real-life meth cook named Walter White was convicted in Alabama. In 2012, he actually made the Tuscaloosa Sheriff's Office Most Wanted list after skipping out on a court date and was recently arrested. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button in the top right. Our channel has loads of other awesome videos just like this.